Howdy, all of you delicious people. I'm here today to review The Breakup. So, I think the main reason why I wanted to go on and watch this film is because it was just a very simple film, and really, I just wanted to see if this movie, like if I remembered it, or if really I could go on and just like review this film and see what happens. So, but really, I just wanted an easygoing film to start out my day. So, for The Breakup, we go on into a film where we at first are to see like the very beginnings of this relationship and how they first met one another, and then we kind of cut to a certain time where we start to see the first pins of the de-escalation of this relationship, which is to just lead to us really just seeing like two people that are to see things differently, and then it just starts to unravel from there, where we really just start to see that Brooke is to see her possibly leaving this relationship as a motivator to go on and be more artsy, or to go on and eventually travel the world and to finally just have fun with her life, where Gary goes on and is to just kind of really be at a unmotivated point to just go on and just want to do everything very like simplistic, or to go on and have very small goals, if anything, or he's just kind of going through the motions of his life, and Brooke is to go on and realize that like Gary is just at this one point in his life, and like this is just the height of where Gary is going to be for what is going to be the rest of their years. So, and I can completely understand that. Like, this relationship is not just like, oh, like this guy is dead weight dragging me down. No, like it's just like we can just really see that one person isn't exactly comfortable where she's at, and Gary is. So that's where like we're starting to just see like conflict. But the whole story really breaks down with that whole lemon thing in this movie, where we have Brooke who purposely wants Gary to buy 12 lemons as just a display piece for them to just show off. And Gary is like, if you're going to buy lemons, like you need to be like productive with them. You need to go on and put them in some recipe somewhere. And so if you're not doing that, then I don't understand the value of just having a lemon bowl out somewhere. It doesn't make sense. Or really, Gary just wants Brooke to just go on and like just make any kind of like displaying item. It just doesn't rationally make sense to like waste lemons as a display piece. Like that's when I really didn't understand when we would go on and in certain movies we would just have like these bowls of apples just kind of laying out, and a lot of times they wouldn't actually be real apples, they would actually be fake apples. And I'm like, okay, that doesn't even make sense. Like you're having this item out there just as a display thing. Like I know, like I understand being artsy, but that just feels like wasting space. um but then again, like if you are ever to have any kind of collection of any kind, a lot of people would go on and just be like, well, isn't that just a waste of space? It's like, well, like no, like that technically that item has value. And it's like, well, what value is? So you would go on and you would just like eventually like realize that anything would be justifying, as far as like an artsy thing. So anyways, going into this film, it's a very just flat film. At some points, we just realize that this film also doesn't really exactly go anywhere once we reach to a certain point, where just Brooke is just consistently like showcasing all these new men. Gary is to try to get even with her by going on and having a strip poker thing, or to go on and uh, try and go out clubbing or try to go out and like reiterate himself back into what is this new world. And but then I think Gary is starting to realize that maybe instead of him focusing on getting even with Brooke, he needs to just go on and finally focus on his career. And that's the thing that I love about the end of this movie is we just see a brand new Gary who is to be really focusing on his career. And then if a woman happens, a woman happens. But and then Brooke is kind of like very focused on the end of her story of where she wants to go on and go next. So I'm really happy for these two characters at the end of the story, but we just kind of have to get through these things through this story. So conveniently, this movie's available on HBO Max. You can dare, in fact, watch it if you like. But anyways, yeah, I think I'm just gonna go on and double five this bad boy up and just hopefully get into spoilers. Hopefully, I'll remember all the details and all that. If not, let me know in the comments below if there was something that stood out to you within this film. If you were to go on and watch it for whatever reason, I again like this was just a simple enough movie. I just wanted something that wasn't like very complicated or even like long either. So I went into this movie to possibly get some chuckles or some laughs or whatever. But anyways, I think it's about that time to just go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about the time to get to spoil this movie. So the very beginning of this film, we have Gary that's at a Chicago Cubs baseball game. Seems that the Cubs may not be doing so well, but that is to all but benefit Jon Favreau's character, who is Johnny O, who is clapping along like, yeah, like the White Sox did a really good thing. Yeah, yeah. So, come to find out later on in the film, Favreau is to throw in Gary's face that like Gary rarely ever like kind of does anything anymore, and to the point where like the only time when Gary and Johnny go out to like a baseball game is simply when like the White Sox are playing the Cubs. Like they just never just randomly go out to a game and just have fun. So like we really have Gary who just needs a wake up call of just like, hey man, like just kind of do something. Like you gotta like really realize like what you're losing here. But anyways, so Gary goes to notice Brooke at some side of his seats, or his line of seats, like further down. He notices Brooke, and so he is to go on and order like for some 6 hot dogs. And I think the real reasoning to order that many hot dogs with just probably 2 people is a lot of times you get kind of like worried that you're never going to go on and get another person to be walking down your aisle and for you to go on like, sir, I'd like this, please. Because very often when you actually get somebody like calling for something, very rarely do you like get anybody who comes back after X amount of time. It just feels like if you don't like get something in the early part of the game, like you may not get it at all. So and plus also like a lot of like baseball like station food, it's very unique. And also you can really just enjoy like a really good like hot dog or some. So anyways, I've been to a plethora of baseball games and stuff on my time, but anyways, moving on. So we go on and Gary is to offer Brooke like this hot dog as he's like going on and like trying to figure out a way how he can talk to her. And so like Gary is passing down this money for these people, and so like they're passing down these hot dogs, and so like Gary's just trying to figure out a way to talk to this woman. And so once this game ends, all of a sudden we have Gary who's now talking to Brooke, saying like, well, hey, like you don't want to be going out with that guy, like the guy who is to kind of push in his shirts and like be all fancy. It's like you don't want that guy, do you? And so the more and more that Gary is to talk to Brooke, the more that Brooke is convinced that like, well, hey, how about we go on and we grab a bite together, or we just kind of go on together. And so yeah, like Brooke is just won over by the confidence in Gary, and so she just couldn't say no to him also. So now we transition. So Brooke is to go on and is to sell these big lavish pieces to a guy named Carson Wigham, who is played by Ivan here. So Brooke is going on and showcasing consistently to, it seems, only one guy here, this like kind of bizarrish like artwork. And evidently this is Marilyn Dean's artwork, so but it's very just bizarre. So Brooke is going on and consistently trying to get this guy to just buy all these things. Excuse me. To the point where Brooke is to even have Carson like buy a piece that she is to have in her place, so she can just kind of get rid of it, so she can still afford to go on this trip around the world. So, which we have her do later on in the movie. So, also in between, like the very first, like kind of meeting and to where it's like current time, we had a bunch of just kind of random photos. A lot of times of both Gary and Brooke kind of kissing a lot. Like that's most of the pictures where it's just like, oh yeah, like we had this fun moment, kiss. Like, oh yeah, we're both together with all these people, kiss. Hey, yeah, like we're gonna pretend that this is Halloween now and Christmas and kiss and like, and it just goes on to having all these like these interesting things here. Plus, it's kind of funny that we go on in this story and we have the guy who plays Andrew as Peter, who a lot of people probably know him from the Christmas Carol, and he was also to be in the MCU as the guy with the box of scraps and all that stuff. And so it's kind of interesting to have him in this film. So we go on, and so Brooke is to make her day home from work, and Gary's job is to go on and do these bus tours where he's to just kind of like stand around all day and is just kind of tell people certain locations on this bus. And so Gary's to go on and rattle off all this information about Chicago, as we have this woman who is to have supposedly previously been turning tricks, and that's what Gary was to say. And he's like, well, hey, like come on guys, like really help us out, because you don't want this girl to go on and turn any more tricks. That's how I first met her. So Gary goes on and is to be coming from home just exhausted, and so Brooke is to ask Gary, hey, did you buy like the lemons that I told you to buy? And Gary buys 3 of them, and Brooke is like, why did you buy 3 of them? Like I asked for 12. So Gary's like, well, why would you want to buy 12? Like that seems like a massive number of lemons that they would probably never use. And so Brooke is like, well, I want to buy them as a displayer, to just kind of just like, ooh, wow, lemons. And like in my brain, I'm also just thinking, I'm like, why? Like, like I can see if it was like an art piece that you just kind of put on this like on this display thing, and they're like, wow, like if it's like an optical illusion or something like that, I would just be like, wow, that is a really interesting display, but not just a bunch of lemons. But that's just me. Um, like if I'm to do something like artsy or something, I really want something really like artsy. But that's just me. Anyways, so we go on and we have Gary who mentions like, well, why don't you just use those lemons and add them onto the display, like put some zest in that food that ended up burning my mouth. So Brooke is just scrambling on and just like she's as soon as she gets home, she's making all this food for all these people who are to come over. And so not only both is Brooke's family coming over, then also Gary's family is coming over. And then once they all leave, then Brooke is to go on and like do all the dishes, and then so Gary's just like, well, like, hey, I'm just gonna go on and just watch this sports center, and then Brooke is like, well, aren't you gonna help me with the dishes? And Gary's like, why would I want to do the dishes? And so yeah, like we just start to see some dissension in the ranks, so to speak. So, but anyways, we go on into this table, and so we have these two families just talking it out. And the one standout here, of course, is Richard. And so Richard starts going on and is to speak to Dennis. And like Dennis just sounds so passionate about their business and how possibly they're just so close to being able to get their business on boats or in the air or like just going and having so much passion done here. And Richard was like, yeah, like I love that passion. And Richard turns it into some like a cappella like dinner table where he's like, yeah, like I have passion too in this group called the Lone or the Tone Rangers. And so Richard is trying to get everybody into just like, yeah, like you do this beat, you do that beat, you do this, you do that. And so like Richard starts going on and like singing, and he like gets right in the face of like of Gary, and he starts singing along with this song right in his face. And then like Gary's just like, God, like if I have to one more time just hear this guy sing, like I'm just so sick of that. So we go on and we have like certain people like starting to tell jokes at the dinner table. And we have, of course, Lupus, who goes into this one joke that immediately they just like transition from. They're just like, no, 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 no. Like, how about we just kind of go on and just kind of enjoy our meal? So we go on. So after this whole dinner is over and everybody is like leaving kind of just weirded out, and then Gary does not step in and do the dishes. Brooks is just like, you know what, I'm done. Like I'm just done with this. I'm like, we have it where Gary and Brooke are just kind of like conflicting about their people, about their families and whatever. And Brooke is just like, you know what, I've had enough. Like I'm done. So we realize that Gary's now forced to sleep on this kind of fold out couch in the living room, and Brooke is to go on and kind of like sleep in her bed. So now we start to see like certain activities that both these two are to try to do together, and realize that this relationship is starting to unravel. Like at first they go out and like Brooke and Gary are gonna go bowling with one another. And when Gary shows up, all of a sudden this bowling team, like Brooke has say, it's like, well, I don't want Gary bowling with us anymore. And so all of a sudden, Gary ends up getting pushed out of this bowling team just because Brooke is in it. And Gary is telling Brooke, it's like, well, you don't even bowl that well. Like, if anything, like, you do more gutters than anything else. Like, why isn't it that I'm like put into this team, you're kicked out? Like, I'm a better bowler. But so all of a sudden, like, we get to where everybody's to vote Gary out, And then Andrew is to go on and tell Gary that, like, well, hey, like, we need your shirt. And Gary's like, well, wait a minute, like, my shirt, like, has Gary on it. And Andrew is like, well, yeah, we know a guy named Gary. So, and he bowls really well. So we're just going to take, we just need your shirt right now. So Gary just walks out there shirtless and is to want Andrew's like wrist guard, because he's like, yeah, like that was my wrist guard, so like give it to me. It's just petty squabbles. So we go on, and we also start to have Brooke, who is to start dating other guys. And so Brooke is to immediately go on and have like a setup the date called Paul. So we have Brooke, who goes out with a guy named Paul, and Gary doesn't see Paul as like any kind of threat. So Gary goes on and sees, like, hey Paul, like, how about you go on and you have her like do some martinis, and you do this and that to just kind of win her over. So we immediately have Paul, who goes on this date with Brooke and does exactly what Gary says. So all of a sudden we just have Brooke, who is to get this phone call, and it of course is from Abby or Addie, saying that, like, yeah, like, so I'm supposed to like have done this call for you. And Brooke is like, oh wait, you're hurt, you're what? The very cliche-ish dating thing of just like, well, like, yeah, we should really call this date over because I don't like this guy. So Brooke goes on and meets with Addie later and is to mention about, like, really, like, this guy you set me up with. And Addie was just like, well, yeah, like, he was the only one that I could find. So going on, we just have Gary, who consistently like watches sports or just consistently plays video games, to where he's like online gaming with little kids, and he's beating them in football games, and it's like, really? Like, just hey man, like, whatever you want to do. So we have Brooke and we have Gary, and so Brooke at one point is to go to her work, and it seems that we have Justin Long, who just thoroughly enjoy Justin Long. He's just really fun. He's playing this character called Christopher, and so Christopher is to go on and answer the phone and say happy holidays, and Brooke is to realize that it's like, is today a holiday, Christopher? And he's just like, well, no, but like, maybe there's a holiday coming up. And Brooke is like, well, yeah, like, if there's a holiday on that day, say happy holidays. But any other day of the year, like, just go on and just be like, just like skip the holiday thing. And Christopher is just like, well, uh, like, we have Christopher, who is to have had Marilyn tell him to just kind of be like creative. So that's his that's Christopher's creativity for you. So we go on, and so Brooke is uh to go on and just be just so um like irritated with her job, and Marilyn is to come in and realize that Brooke is just so like, she's just sad and whatever. So Marilyn is to tell Brooke, it's like, you know what? How about you just take a day off and go on and be like sad by yourself, and then you can spend that whole day doing that, and then when you come back in here, like, you'll just be your old self again. You'll be happy and whatever. And so whenever Brooke does not go on to take these days off, we just have Brooke, who more and more just comes in there as she's still just like going through this breakup, and she's just still like, she's still just sad. So Marilyn is to just consistently just tell this woman, it's like, you know what, like you should have taken today off. Like I'm just sick of you just looking all like just sad and whatever. So, but anyways, we go into this story, and so Gary is to go on and go to this club to go to this club with Lupus, and Lupus is to come on to every woman and just like have this very like aggressive nature about him. But every single like analogy he has is just be like this hunting analogy where it's like, hey, you got to go after that, like, and like it's like a lion hunting a gazelle. You gotta just gotta really go on it. So Gary, the more and more he talks to Lupus, the more he's just like, you know what, I don't want anything to do with this guy. So we have Gary like just coming back to realize that more and more Brooke is to just see more guys. And so the second guy, who is Mike, when Mike is to be brought to this place, all of a sudden Gary and Mike have something in common because Brooke is taking a while to just kind of prepare herself for this date and is to look all to the nines and whatever. So Gary is just playing a football game, and so all of a sudden Mike and Gary are going and playing this football game that's just a really close game. And when Brooke is to kind of come out, Brooke, of course, is asking Mike, it's like, well, hey, are you ready to go, Mike? And Mike is like, well, hey, like, we really have a really, like, nail biter on our hands for this game. And then Brooke is just like, well, okay, like, we'll just go on, and, like, I'll just sit here and just read this magazine. So come to find out, like, this game is just a game that just never ends. And so Brooke is just like, man, this is taking forever. So finally the match ends, and so Gary and Mike are just talking and going on and on and on. So finally when this match ends, finally when this game ends, Gary and Mike go out and dating. And so Mike is just going on and on about how great Gary is and all the potential for Gary's job. And Brooke is like, you know what? I don't want to date you. Like, I don't want to date you if you're just like my guy that I've already dated. Like, if you're basically just like Gary, no. Like, I'm done. So Brooke just goes out of this cab and she just leaves because she's like, no, I'm just done with this. So we go further and further into this story, and so Gary's to go on and have this kind of strip poker thing, to have all these women and all this party and whatever, and because like he wants to try to like show up Brooke that he can get women too if he really wanted to. So we have at one point where they're playing charades, and all the friends are being invited to play these charades because game night, and Gary is just thinking that Brooke is gonna just like make all this food and make all this stuff happen, and Brooke is just like, well, no, like it's your game night, like how about you put in some effort? And all of a sudden we just see like the Gary style like game night where there's just like craft cheeses and there's gum and like there's just like we just see like that there's like whatever is in the fridge is like whatever they just do for this game night. So all of a sudden they're doing charades, and we go on and we have Brooke who's like drawing this thing, and Gary is to consistently say it's like, yeah, like we both have the same like connection together, the same wavelength. We're gonna figure this out. So Brooke consistently tries to draw this thing, and Barry's like, "It's a shoe, it's a shoe, it's a shoe, it's a foot, it's a shoe." And so they go on, and the time runs out, and then Brooke is like, "It's a sock, it's a sock," and Gary's like, "Why did you draw it that way? It's like you drew the same thing, and then you draw it smaller. Like, how is anybody gonna get that?" And so we also have it to where Carrie is just so upset because Brooke is the artist and like she can't even draw what a sock is. And so we go on, and so it just gets to that escalating point where we bring in Riggleman, and like there was a point before also where Gary was to mention about wanting to bring in a pool table. Let me pause this for a second. Gary wanted to put in this pool table, and so Brooke uh, was just kind of be against that. And so when Gary is to more and more just like want his like kind of way of place, he decides that he's just going to go and buy a pool table without Brooke's consent. And so it's kind of interesting because later on in the story, Brooke is mentioned. It's like, well, you know what? If we didn't have that coffee table, we didn't have this very like large like couch, we would have probably gone on, and we would have been able to have the room for this pool table. And Gary was like, well, yeah, like like, but we needed like those certain like things to like eventually they needed the folded out couch for Gary because it was being very useful. So, but anyways, so we go on into this story, and Riggleman is to realize that, like, yeah, like, we now realize that you guys should really be split up, that, like, this really isn't working out. And so you guys need to, like, kind of decide that you need to go on and, like, stop living with one another. And so Riggleman is saying that, like, well, normally I wouldn't go on and take a commission for this. And they're like, oh, well, thank you. And he's like, well, like, I'm saying that just to be nice. I have to take commission. So Riggleman is saying that he can go on and bring people in to see this place, and because everybody wants to live in this place anyways, and so neither one of these people can afford on their own salary to 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 eventually keep this place. So we have Riggleman who goes on and is to sell this place while they're not there, and so they end up getting 2 weeks to to move out. So it like really doesn't feel like they are to even look at those 2 weeks and just be like, oh, okay, let's start moving out right away. It just feels like the last couple days they just decide to get things together and hodgepodge, like, get everything out. So we even have at one moment where when Brooke is to go off to work, we have Carson, after he's to look through all these pieces, we have Carson who goes and is to finally say to Brooke, it's like, well, hey, like, can I go on and ask for your number? And Brooke is just like, well, like, I'm with somebody right now. I'm with a boyfriend. And Carson is like, oh, I'm sorry, my bad. Then Christopher looks at Brooke and he's like, wait a minute, what? Like, that is like a really like good looking man, and you're telling him no? And Brooke is like, yeah, nah. Plus, probably don't want to like conflict with that whole like business relationship, but still. So Brooke is to go on, and she is to uh, eventually go on a date with this guy. And this is like really after Brooke is to try to give it one last shot with Gary, because Brooke is to go on and have these tickets for these 90s, this band called the 97s. So Brooke is to go on with Gary to just be like, well, hey, how about we go to this concert together? Because it's 2 tickets. And Gary is just like, yeah, sure, like I'll go to the concert. Then he completely decides to not go. And then Brooke is going to this concert, and she's realizing that Gary isn't there. And so Brooke is just like, well, like, okay, like, I guess he didn't show. Brooke goes on back home crying, and Gary's like, well, hey, like, whatever the price of those tickets were, like, I'm sorry, I'll refund you. Like, I didn't mean to show up. I just completely forgot about it. I got really busy. And so Brooke is all of a sudden crying, and Gary's like, well, like, I didn't know that those, like, that concert meant so much to you. And Brooke was just like, well, no, that's not it. Like, Brooke just wanted Gary to just care about something. Just like say that like, hey, I didn't want to go, or I did want to go, or whatever. And like that she just wanted him to just like say something. It just feels like Gary after the whole breakup, like he's just been very quiet and just whatever about a lot of the stuff. So and then we go on and we have Gary who is to speak with Johnny, and like Johnny is to kind of bring it home to just be like, well, yeah, like this girl never had a chance to really like get to know you because your guard was always up. You never let her in, and you never really tell her how you felt. And so like that's where more and more Brooke was just kind of just getting to the point of just like never really like feeling that Gary really cared about anything. So to the point where Johnny was just like, well, yeah, like when do we ever go to the baseball games? Like besides when the Sox are playing, like when do we ever do anything together? And so like Gary is like realizing that like, well, yeah, like me and Brooke rarely ever did anything. And so the point where Brooke is to kind of give this olive branch to have Gary go on and have her do something together, then like that's where we just have these moments. So we go on into this story, and so Brooke is to come in with Carson to see Gary, who's trying to make this effort, who, like, the house looks completely different, and Gary is to go on and make this dinner and try to make this kind of attempt here. So we go on, and Gary is now pouring his heart out to Brooke and saying, like, well, hey, like, I get that you like have this guy here, but like I'm gonna finally tell you how I feel, and I'm hoping that you'll accept that. Like Gary doesn't want this relationship to just like fizzle out, and Brooke is going on and saying like, well, I wish I could feel the same way, but I just don't. So Gary goes on and just takes a walk, and so Brooke and Carson go back into the place just so Brooke can sell Carson on this art piece that Gary was to mention that that was such like a complicated thing to have that be nailed to this wall, and so Brooke is going to get rid of it so that way she can go on to eventually afford the the trip around the world that she is to want to go on and do. So after that whole moment, realizing that this relationship is over, that they've decided that they're both gonna go their separate ways, we have Gary who goes on and focuses more on his job, and because we have the moment where Gary is to go on and be confronted by Dennis, like, what do you do here? Like you don't really do anything. And Gary's like, well, I'm the talent. Like I'm the reason why everybody comes on and does all those tickets. And so we finally have Gary that is to finally go on and do the job that Dennis is to keep getting irritated that he's not doing. So Gary finally does his books and is to go on and give this to, of course, Dennis here. And so Gary goes on and hugs Dennis, and Dennis is very weirded out by this hug, and so Gary then leaves, and Dennis is like, okay. So we start to see that this company is just prosper so well that Gary's to go on and now be doing these tours from this boat, and so now it seems that this like company has gone and done so well. So we go on, and so Brooke and Gary are to separate, and at some point they just bump into one another as Gary had gone on and gotten all these groceries, and Brooke is just like, "Oh, hey, yeah, like you just look so thin," and like Gary is really like gone on and like just changed the way he looks and just like decided to really just really try for his life to just improve and whatever, and so Brooke and Gary are all of a sudden just kind of catching up quickly, and then they're like, "Well, hey, like, okay, well, I'll like, hopefully, I'll see you again, or maybe we'll catch up or something." So they go on, and Brooke and Gary are just kind of doing these like double takes, kind of looking back at one another as they leave, but they realize that, like, I guess, like, both of them were really good for someone else, or for them to just kind of focus on themselves rather than going on and trying to find somebody to eventually be with. They are just really good by themselves, and that's how the movie just kind of fizzles off and ends. So, with that said, we also had the one moment in this movie, because I'm going to kind of taper back on anything that I forgot about here. We had the one early moment where Gary was to have the Tone Rangers coming in to Brooke's bedroom and doing their music, and so Gary just wakes up to all these guys going on and singing, and so Gary is going into this room and talking uh, to, of course, Richard, to try to convince him, like, "Hey man, like, I don't want any of this singing, like, what are you doing here, and like, I'm gonna kick you out." And Richard's just like, "Well, Brooke told us to come into this room, and so like we're practicing." And so the more and more that Gary is trying to push Richard and his Tone Rangers out of this place, all of a sudden Richard is go on and karate chop and freaking deck Gary, and now Gary is like have a bloody nose and he's putting ice on his shoulder, and Gary and Brooke comes in, and so Gary is telling Brooke like, "Man, that was a real low blow. Like that was a real like wow, like you really uh like wow, what a smart move that you pulled there." And Brooke is like, "What? Like what are you talking about?" And it's like, yeah. So we start to see like some movement being had on certain parts to eventually just get under the skin of certain people. And so yeah, I just wanted to mention that also, just in case I forgot about anything. uh we also had the one moment where like Brooke had called Addie, and Addie was just kind of talking um, about certain things, and like Andrew, who's of course Addie's husband, was listening on, and Andrew's like, "What? Like, what are you talking about?" And Addie's like, "Hey, I'm not talking about you. I'm just like, I'm just trying to just be sympathetic to my friend." And Andrew's like, "Oh, okay, okay, all right." Like, just whatever you gotta say to just make her like happy. Um, I thought that moment was kind of funny. Um, but yeah, I think other than that, I think most of this movie is covered, or I think I'm just kind of fine with it. So with that said, I'm going to get out of here. Bye, buddy. Bye, buddy.